Hi, welcome back to Box of Delights. One thing I've been wanting to do for a while is an instructional video on Race for the Galaxy. It's a wonderful card game, but people do struggle a little bit with the rules. Race for the Galaxy is 2 to 4 players, ages 12 plus, 30 to 60 minutes, but it does have a Solitaire expansion called the Gathering Storm, and this is what I wanted to show you. With the benefit of the Solitaire rules, I can show you how the game is played against this AI opponent, and you can take that instructional and use it in your 2 to 4 player games as well. These are some of the components. Primarily you're playing with a large deck of cards and these victory point tokens. These are some action cards that you hold in your hand. We've got a couple of rule books. This is Race for the Galaxy, this is the Gathering Storm. Please be aware also I'm looking at the Rio Grande Games version here. And we also have this card summary sheet. It gives you a summary of all the iconography that people tend to struggle a little bit with, as well as the turn order or round summary. And then when you're playing with Gathering Storm and the Solitaire, you have this robot player. His actions are determined by dice and bits of logic here which determine what actions he takes with the roll of those dice. The expansion also introduces these goals, so this is another way that the game can be played to add an extra level of ways of winning victory points when you're playing multiplayer. We're not going to cover those, we're just going to cover the basic game. I'm going to show you now how to set up a basic 2-player 1 versus the AI game. There's 5 sets of 9 action cards. These are player action cards. We're going to only need 1 set. You don't actually need these when playing Solitaire, but I'm going to recommend you use them, especially if you're learning the game. So take one of these sets. If you're playing in more than 2 players, then there's a couple of cards in here that you don't need. These are duplicates, and they have this icon on the bottom right. There's an extra settle and an extra development action, which playing 3 or more you don't need. We're going to keep those in, so we should have 9 player action cards. Like I say, you don't need them playing Solitaire, but I'm going to suggest you use them. We'll set these aside for one moment. And the next thing you need to do is grab our large deck of Race for the Galaxy cards. And out of this deck, I want you to separate all what are called start worlds. We know what they are, because they have these blue numbers in the top left, bottom right corners. Okay, and they should be numbered 0 through to 8. I'm going to shuffle these up, these start worlds, and we're going to deal 1 to each player. 1 to the robot and 1 to us. We'll keep them face down for now, but these are our start worlds. This is where we're going to start our race for the galaxy. The other start worlds, we're going to shuffle those back into our larger deck. This is a big thick deck, so I tend to split it into 2 and then start shuffling it. Once we're done shuffling, we're going to place this large deck to one side. This is becoming the draw deck for the game. And because I'm playing Solitaire and I'm using the Gathering Storm robot player, there is a little bit of setup to go through. So before we get into the game, let's go through this setup. Hopefully you can play along, and then I'll lay out the gameplay. The premise really is that we're going to be building the biggest galaxy, and we've got to build a bigger galaxy than our opponent, and that galaxy will give you victory points. Whoever ends the game with the most victory points will be declared the winner. There's not a great deal of interaction going on here. There is perhaps a little bit more interaction when you're playing the robot than first feels, because you're watching what he does and you're perhaps responding to the way the robot player is working. Which start world you get will very much dictate your strategy, but I'll show you as we get through the setup how you go about earning those victory points. The first thing we need to do is grab ourselves a supply of 24 victory points. It's 12 victory points per player. We're playing 2-player, us versus the robot. They come in different denominations. This is a 10, these are 5s, these are 1. So that's 10, 20, 4. Actually, I'm going to switch out the 10 for 2 5s. 24 victory points. These are victory points that we can earn during the game. We can also earn victory points by playing cards into what's known as our tableau. These are things that you kind of play to the table. Once you have a completed tableau of 12 cards, these are worlds that you've formed into your empire, then the game will end. If we run out of these victory points, these are kind of bonus ones that can be achieved through card effects, if you like, then the game will end. So there's 24 set aside for the start of the game. There's also 3 levels of difficulty, easy, medium and hard. If you're playing on the easy level, you also give the robot access to 1 of these additional 6 victory point counters. Medium it would be 2, and then on hard it's 3, but you switch them over, so it's 3 9s. Okay, we're playing easy level, so we're going to give the robot player access to this single 6 victory point counter. Next we'll reveal our start worlds. So the robot player has the Separatist colony, start world number 5, and we have start world number 8, the doomed world. We'll talk about this in a moment. Let's finish setup. For now, all we're interested in is what the robot player got given. Depending on which start world the robot got, we need to take these credit and economy size markers and place them on these tracks. And normally the credit will start at number 1, unless you're using start world 6 or 2 for the robot player. So robot has start world number 5, so we'll begin at the default number 1. And then for economy size track, we start at 0 for the robot, unless they're using start words numbered 1 or 4, in which case they'll begin at spot number 1. We've also got 2 player action markers, and we'll just place these over here for now. What these are going to be used for is, depending on what actions we take, might adjust the way that the robot player responds. So this table here, it looks complicated, but all it does is it represents their AI, and we're going to use these markers to say if the player does this, then the robot might do that. And once I get into gameplay, I'll show you that working out. But next, we potentially do have to adjust some of this AI, and for this we got these other tokens. There's bigger ones and smaller ones. We need to find all the ones that represent the robot start world number 5. So this is number 3, that's 1 and 5. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of tokens here which are going to adjust this AI somewhat because we're starting with the Separatist colony, start world number 5. This token is going to get placed here on the board, and these 2 are going to cover the parts of the corresponding colour. So here and here. Okay, so what's on the printed on the Solitaire playmat is overridden by these special match counters for start world number 5. We're almost ready to begin playing. First thing we're going to do is deal 6 cards to ourselves to begin our starting hand, and 4 cards face down to the robot to form his draw deck. They don't have a hand. Okay, we're just going to draw cards from this draw deck, and it kind of represents their hand, if you like, but it's the cards that they may be playing. Before we begin play, we take our 6 cards. We're going to keep 4 and discard 2. I'll give you a quick look at the anatomy of these cards before we begin, so you understand what we're doing. There's 2 types of cards. The ones with the circles represent worlds, or planets if you like. So here we have Prosperous World, Secluded World. The ones with diamonds, they're developments. So they're not worlds in themselves, they're not planets that we're building into our empire, they're developments upon our empire. So this one says deficit spending, another deficit spending, drop ships, public works. Alright, so there's developments and there's worlds. These numbers here in the hexagon, they're the victory points, and these are the things we're trying to accumulate to win the game. So if we manage to have these worlds in our hand and play it to our tableau, we will score 2 victory points at the end of the game. If we have this development in our hand and we manage to deploy it to our tableau, we'll have another 2 victory points at the end of the game. Remember, the game will end if we have 12 cards of this type in our tableau, representing our empire. Okay? These larger numbers inside the circles, they represent the cost to play those cards, and we pay cost with other cards from our hand. So for example, if I wanted to play Secluded World, it would cost me 1 card, and I could pick any one of these cards as a cost, discard it, and that would be Secluded World paid for. As another example, if I wanted to play something more expensive like Dropships, its cost is 4. So I would play Dropships, earning my 2 victory points at the end of the game, but I'd have to discard 4 cards, any 4 cards, in order to pay for that cost. Alright, so that's what those numbers represent. We'll look at the individual colours, because these things are going to have different colours, and we're going to learn what these different icons mean as we get into the game. For now, I've got to choose 4, discard 2. I'm going to discard Dropships and one of these deficit spending. You can't play more than one world or development with the same name, so I'm going to get rid of this duplicate deficit spending. Keep these 4 for now, and these simply go to a discard pile. Kind of messy. It should be face down, but I'll keep it like that just for the moment so you can see what's going on. Next, we're going to play a round of the game. Now, a round of the game consists of 2 or more of 5 phases. We have the explore phase, they're represented by these actions. Then we go to the develop phase, then the settle phase, consume phase, and produce phase. But we don't do all 5 phases every round. We get to choose 2 action cards, and our opponent's going to get to choose 2 player actions. And these 2 actions we take represent one of those 5 phases. So let's say we choose to explore and develop, then those are the only 2 phases. We'll do phases 1 and 2, but 3, 4 and 5 will get skipped. Unless our opponent, who's also choosing 2 actions, chooses one of 3, 4 or 5. Okay? Let's assume our opponent chooses develop and consume. Then what that means in this round of the game, we'll do phase 1, we'll do phase 2, we'll skip phase 3, we'll do phase 4, and we'll skip phase 5. Let's assume that our opponent chose 1 and 5, and we chose 1 and 2. Then we would do phases 1, phase 2, skip 3, skip 4, and then we do phase 5. Okay, so there's 5 phases potentially, but only the phases that get chosen as player actions by the players will actually get executed. And normally in a 2-player game you would choose your actions, your opponent would choose their actions and use those cards to represent them, but in the Gathering Storm with the AI we're going to use these dice to select the 2 actions for the robot player, alright? And that's 2 actions each. And you can see that the AI Matt has all of those 5 phases listed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's different in the 2-player game, remember we added those extra 2-player actions, is that normally you can choose to do this one, develop, or this one, settle, just once per round. But in a 2-player game, and therefore in Solitaire, you can actually choose to do the develop action twice or the settle action twice. There's also 2 different types of explore and 2 different types of consume. What do each of these 5 phases mean? For explore, that's when you are going and grabbing new cards from the draw deck. Develop, that's when you're playing these development cards, the ones with the diamonds on. Settle, that's when you get to play world cards or settle these new worlds into your tableau. Consume. Some of your worlds produce resources. Consume is when you consume those resources, and normally you're turning those resources into victory points, or it could be that you're turning them into card draws, and sometimes a combination of both. Finally, produce, phase 5, that's when you actually produce resources on your worlds. Okay, the resources that you can then consume on a subsequent round. Alright, so it's explore, grab cards, develop, play developments, settle, play settlements, consume, burn resources, produce resources. Okay, so you can see that there's fundamentally 2 different ways of generating victory points. Playing these developments and worlds into your tableau, and then consuming resources to generate victory points. Now I've got a couple of worlds here. This one, for example, these icons you can see represent each of those 5 phases. So I can see if I've got prosperous world in my tableau, what it means is during phases 1, 2, 3, it does nothing. There's 2 phases to the consume. We'll talk about that when we get there. I won't complicate things just yet. But what it means is during phase 4 we can turn resources into victory points, and then during phase 5 on prosperous world we can actually produce resources. With secluded world it does nothing on phases 1, 2, 3. Similarly for phase 5 it produces, but phase 4 this time instead of creating victory points it creates card draws. Okay, let's have a look at some of our productions. So deficit spending does nothing through 1, 2, 3 or 5, but in phase 4 during the consume phase it says we can discard up to 2 cards to gain 1 victory point apiece. Okay, and then public works, this does nothing in phase 1, but in phase 2, that's the development phase, it says that we can draw 1 card after placing a development down, and it also says during the consume phase that we can turn a resource into a victory point. Okay, so you can see that different developments and different worlds will do different things on different phases of the game, and that's what these icons represent. They're going to get, you know, different things happening as we draw more cards. So here we go, let's head in and let's choose our first 2 actions for the first round of the game.